Hello, and welcome to another fully live Friday episode of Hacking with Friends. My name is Cody Kinsey. I am a security researcher at Varonis, and today we have my friend and cryptozoology expert, Michael, here to help go through the hacker news of the week. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Of course. I hear we have some Australians in the chat. We're always on the lookout for those little local drop bears.
Yes. Always an expert on the cryptozoology.
Of course.
So yes, and if you're wondering, Alex is having computer problems, and that's why he has not been on the show recently. And if you're wondering why we've been starting late, it's also because of computer problems. I have had to wait for my computer to charge twice now. So sorry about that. Hopefully we'll be fixing it soon, and thank you for sticking around. So we have plenty of news to go through, starting early today. No, we're late. We're late per usual. But yeah, so we have lots of news to go through this week. Lots of stuff happened. Michael, do you want to start out?
Sure. Give me a second. So over on my screen, I have, I'm not sure how to say this. Tiltus. Okay, I'm gonna go with Tiltus. So the Tiltus key is an open source hardware hardware development project, open source hardware security key. It does some interesting things. Such as, so you can have multiple apps on it, and each of them can have their secret keys independently, and you don't have to, in theory, be concerned about the apps, sharing secrets across the hardware device. So pretty interesting. I don't think you can actually buy this yet, but they do have the GitHub page.
What is this for?
An open source hardware security key.
Oh, so it's like, sorry, but what would a human do with this?
Yeah, so you can use this for like two-factor authentication.
There you go. So 2FA for logging into apps.
Yeah, 2FA would probably be the best case. In theory, you could also use it for things like cryptocurrency wallets. I believe that's more what the applications are for, that sort of thing. And like I've said, the open source is really cool because a lot of these hardware security like tokens and wallets have some level of proprietary hardware in them, and they kind of close it off. And we have a very special guest that is gone now.
Yeah, he's already gone.
But,
I heard a cry, and our very own Hack Cat came in to
a bark of distress.
All right, so I'm sure he will wander through the background at some point or start crying again. All right, so over on my screen, I have a really cool resource that I found over the week. Unredacted Magazine. So this is something by Mike Bazell. There's a lot of other contributors, and I found this to be a really interesting read for anybody who's interested in OSINT or just how you can find data in interesting places. Yeah, so if you're looking for a good source of OSINT that's regularly updated, then you will probably like this. And also, it's very easy to read. So yeah, this was probably my favorite resource that I found this week. I like to shout those out when I see them. Yeah, so check it out if you like OSINT stuff. So also, I've been doing a lot of work on the Wi-Fi Pineapple. I shouted this out, I think, last week, but I also, the Wi-Fi Coconut. So the Coconut versus the Pineapple, important distinction. The Coconut is more for like passive surveillance, and it doesn't actually allow you to transmit unless you modify some hardware stuff. And I found that it's actually really easy to do kind of an interesting hybrid attack using a QR code and then the Wi-Fi Coconut to track a phone. So in the episode that we're working on this week, I was using the Wi-Fi Coconut as a tracker after tricking someone into scanning a QR code that added a particular SSID to their phone's like trusted networks. The key is I also made that network hidden, which isn't immediately obvious when you add it from a QR code. So by tricking someone into joining this network, even one time, it makes their phone constantly broadcast the name of this network over and over and over wherever they are. So if you want to use the Wi-Fi Coconut to then track them, all you need to do is put, instead of target SSID, whatever network name you tricked them into joining with the QR code, and boom, you have a tracker that will let you know anytime somebody who has scanned that QR code is in range. Really interesting and was very fun to develop. And as you can see, this is, at least on a macOS system, using T-Shark, very, very easy to do. So yeah, I was super impressed by how easy it was for me to just sit down and reading the documentation, create a filter so I could find any packets related to a particular network. And the fact that the Wi-Fi Coconut scans on all available channels simultaneously means that there's a 100% chance of picking up, somebody in range, no matter what channel they're broadcasting on, provided it's in the 2.4 gigahertz range. If there's, broadcasting in the 5 gigahertz range, unfortunately, that's not supported right now. But 2.4 gigahertz generally will take care of this if you're looking to track someone's phone based on them just scanning a QR code. So that was my favorite little piece of research I did last week.
Yeah, and that's what I really like about the Coconut too, because I remember not like 3 or 4 years ago, it was a huge deal with the Wi-Fi cactus. You're like, oh, you can scan all of these channels, and they had to spend so much money buying I think 14 different pineapples or something, and I think they were doing some 5 gigahertz scanning. But to think now that you can spend just $150 or so and scan all 2.4 channels simultaneously is really cool. And like you said, I think it's really, really useful if you're trying to do some high-speed stuff where you're just driving by an establishment or whatever that you have permission to, and doing some rapid scanning.
I mean, you don't need permission to do scans.
I guess that's true.
I mean, it's polite, I guess, but if you knocked on someone's door, like, "Excuse me, sir, can I scan your Wi-Fi?" They're probably going to say no. And if you're doing passive stuff, if you're just the Wi-Fi Coconut, it can't touch anything, So I would be hard pressed to somebody tell me an illegal use of the Wi-Fi Coconut. I dare you. I'm interested now. I can't think of one off the top of my head because it's just receiving packets, right? So well, just receiving.
I wonder if you there are handshakes just normally going across the airwaves, right? So if you intercepted one of those, would that count?
That's legal. You can, in the United States anyway, you are legally allowed to record traffic across the wire. Whether or not you're legally allowed to then do something with it afterwards, brute force it and connect to the network, that's something different. But I mean, if you're just listening to handshakes, at least in the United States, that's not illegal. So if you're a creative person, please tell me one way, because I know that you risk frying the antenna that all of the different things are sharing if you try to broadcast with it. So I mean, somebody think of one. I'm curious now. Okay, so another piece of news related to tracking is what's that car app that I'm banned from, Michael? It's Turo. So there's a lot of times when people are putting their private cars up for rent, and whether or not they're tracking your every move and then maybe commenting on it on TikTok is now an open question. There's yes. So there's a lot of people who have these little things that you plug into your car's OBD2 port, and it powers itself up. And sometimes if you someone, Big Brother, watching over your shoulder, it can do a GPS tracking of your speed, where you go, and you can get marginally cheaper insurance because of that. Some people sign up for that sort of thing. I myself never would. Michael, would you do that?
Maybe.
Yeah. He would do that. Yeah. So, but it turns out that this same type of device can also be used to track cars of people who are renting their cars. And it might not immediately be apparent to the people who are renting, or rather, driving around this car, that they are being tracked at every turn, and all the places that they are going are scrutinized and then made fun of on TikTok for attention.
Yeah, no, so that's what I find interesting here, is that that's not against some privacy policy. Because I think that most people would agree, if you're renting out a car, having a tracker on your own car is probably okay-ish. But then sharing that information publicly.
Well, and also disclosure.
Yeah.
If you are going to have everything that you do in the car tracked, you're probably going to treat it very differently.
Right.
So it's kind of, without sharing the fact that not only is your information being collected, it's also being shared for, in this case, potentially commercial gain. That's a new fear of private people recording data for their own amusement. Of course, I have the same fear with Ring cameras. There's often very exploitative videos of people at their worst moments, that have been easily shared because of Ring cameras.
Yeah.
And those videos never go away. They're up on the internet and they're there forever. So, just another interesting way that somebody might be tracking you if you rent a car from a private seller. Of course, some of these, larger car companies might be tracking it in case of theft, but they generally don't have that on all the time. And they're not going to, in this case, ding you for going over the speed limit or something. So these kind of Big Brother approaches to renting cars are very creepy, and they could lead to somebody just talking about your daily life on TikTok and making fun of you.
Yeah, that's very concerning.
So, all right. So I also did a video with David Bombal where I was going over some of my favorite hacking tools. And in this video, I was using an operating system that was recommended to me by a friend a while ago, and it's worked pretty smoothly since then. And honestly, because I don't really use the Raspberry Pi that much for this sort of thing, at least lately, I kind of have fallen out of use of using it. When I came back to use it, I found that it was super buggy, and my presentation for David was actually went really poorly. I had to like drop out of it at the end and re-record part of it by myself because the tool was just performing so badly. And I've also gotten an email now from the person who wrote Ergeddon demanding to know why I wasn't using the most current version, which caused like a big crash and made his program look bad. But I mean, I installed the most current version that was on Manjaro, but now it seems as though this has been a pattern for a while, that Manjaro has been like doing some funky stuff when it comes to taking things that are unstable or otherwise like not supported, not really giving back much to the community, and then kind of building this thing that is often like not ready for users at all because it's taking things from other projects that are just super unstable or not done. In this case, it looks like it was shipping an unstable kernel. And they did this without engaging with the people who were making this kernel, and it really caused a lot of frustration. This is not the first time that Manjaro has also been highlighted for doing some sketchy stuff. So I rescind my previous recommendation of Manjaro as an operating system on the Raspberry Pi. Because frankly, I hadn't used it in a good amount of time, and it had been pretty good back when I used it, but based on a lot of things I've seen in the community lately, I cannot recommend it anymore. So unfortunately, if you want to try Arch, you're going to have to try a little harder. But anyway, yeah, so I would not recommend the current version of Manjaro on Apple Silicon, and I would also not recommend it for the Raspberry Pi. So speaking of my fears of Ring cameras, the police might now be watching you through Ring cameras at any moment, whenever they want. And this is the result of a kind of change in tone of what the people of San Francisco want for surveillance. So, wow, that's a big climate warning. Originally, San Francisco was one of the first cities to vote to ban facial recognition, recognizing that the technology was flawed and also could lead to false convictions and other problems when it was inaccurate, and that there was really a very low bar for what was being considered acceptable. And this was having a big impact on people's rights. So they voted to make that not a thing. But then immediately, a couple years later, in response to a small rise in crime, or at least a perceived rise in crime, decided that private citizens' cameras could be connected to by police with permission initially, but then afterwards, you know, they could revoke that permission at any time, but the police would maintain the ability to just basically join these cameras or record from these cameras whenever they want. And the process for this is supposed to be transparent. There's supposed to be logs kept, but really there's no standard spelled out for this. And we've seen this sort of thing abused so many times that you better believe that if somebody thinks their spouse is cheating on them and there's a security camera that's someone's private Ring door camera that's right next to an address they think they might be going to, that police officer might find an excuse to start looking through that camera, because we've seen that exact scenario happen with these more advanced tools. It wasn't that long ago that somebody was indicted, I think also in San Francisco, for going through a bunch of tracking and cell phone tracking data, looking for where their ex had been going, and then when they got caught, contacting their ex and asking them to give them written permission to surveil them retroactively. So these sorts of things really do happen, and expanding that surveillance platform to be any random citizen's Ring doorbell or any random camera that can connect to the internet is, in my opinion, a real problem, because it means that, you know, once you give permission for the sort of thing, the barrier to somebody getting access to that data and maybe processing it. For example, you can read license plates from a lot of these cameras and use them as an automated license plate tracking system, which, I mean, would probably be able to infer a lot of data about where people are, where they're going. This sort of addition to the database that the police have access to could really easily be abused by processing the data in more invasive ways. So yeah, I'm not super excited to see this, and knowing that you're never really sure if you're being watched by the police through like a private security camera is also something I find very sketchy.
Yeah, well, and also what's really concerning about that whole industry is the fact that even when they do recognize the flaws with it and try to put rails in place, such as a case a couple back where the company had it where you had to submit a search warrant before you could gather the data, but then they weren't validating those search warrants. So there was a corrupt cop who was literally uploading like blank PDF documents as search warrants, and then they weren't checked in any way. So then he was gathering all this data, I believe, about like friends and coworkers and all of this. And it's just really disturbing because you would hope that there would be more safeguards in place on this sort of thing because, the Constitution, at least in the US, protects against unreasonable search and seizure. And kind of, I think a lot of people assume that means like unreasonable surveillance. But I guess, that's not always as protected as you might imagine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So over here, give me just a second. I have a really cool new Capture the Flag. So those of you familiar with Capture the Flag, these are CTF games hosted on websites, usually to test your hacking skills in an ethical and legal manner. And then also, it's just really cool way to, see how skilled you are and learn some things along the way. Well, Google is getting in on the game now. So it's not just websites like Hack the Box. Now you have this website with Leet Speech hacking at Google. And yeah, it's CTF. It looks like it only has about 5 challenges available here right now. But again, there might be more just hidden. So very cool to check out if you're into CTFs. I have not gotten a chance to try this, and it's relatively new. But even with how new it is, there are hundreds of people on the leaderboards already. If you look at the Hall of Fame here, so people are really going at it. So if you find this sort of thing interesting and you're bored of all the other websites, definitely something to check out. In a similar vein, Wireshark 4.0 has just been released. So Wireshark is a very popular network protocol analyzer. The 4.0 would suggest there are a lot of new features. I don't use it enough to recognize the usefulness of some of these, but the one I do recognize as being really useful is the display filter syntax is now more powerful with many new extensions. So like one of the classic problems you'll get when you open Wireshark or something like that is you'll have a flood of information, like all these packets on any kind of network that's being used, at all. And so being able to filter those down and find the data that you're actually looking for or the abnormal behavior you're actually looking for is where the filters come in. And we have several videos here on writing filters for Wireshark, including the video we did a while back on how you can find hidden cameras. So I imagine this new display filter would probably be useful for filtering, based on MAC addresses and a combination of other factors. So you could find things like cameras on a network, for instance.
Nice. All right. Over on my screen.
Okay.
I want to give a shout out to our good friend Patrick Wordle. So he is currently hosting my #1 most wanted to go to conference, which I still haven't been to, which is, do you know what it is?
Conference?
Yeah.
Objective by the Sea?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of you. Yeah, so Objective by the Sea is in Hawaii, and it is a Mac OS security conference. It's, as far as I know, it's like the only one of its kind, or at least it's the only one I really want to go to.
Well, I love that he put it in Hawaii very purposefully.
Please. Like I've been begging to go to this conference. It just was not in the cards this month, but it is currently going on. If you are not lucky enough to be in Hawaii and you're interested in macOS security, Patrick finds crazy stuff all the time. The kinds of different like malicious programs that have been written for macOS are so sneaky, and state actors are getting involved. And since Patrick is like an ex-NSA guy, like he knows how to take apart these programs and see exactly how they work. And honestly, his write-ups are some of the most detailed and easy to understand that I've ever found for understanding how just malicious software propagates and how it works. And his tools are great too. So I wanted to shout this out. If you're not lucky enough to be in Hawaii, then all the talks are being streamed for free, so you can check it out. And yeah, again, I am so sad that I'm not at this talk. So if you have the ability to go to it, then you absolutely should, because it is fantastic and I really want to be there.
That's something I'm really glad has come out of the whole pandemic. The fact that all these conferences are now live streaming and such, because, like you said, there's so many of these conferences you can't make for various reasons. It's really nice, even if you can't watch them real time, to have those talks recorded and be able to go back and watch them. Because I've always reflected on the fact that there's so much knowledge that is just lost because, you couldn't, travel 500 miles and take a week off from work to go to a conference.
All right, so I've got one more.
Okay.
Are you an electronics nerd? Like, do you want to know what an Iranian suicide drone's
Oh,
brain looks
gosh.
like? Well, here it is. It has been taken apart from a seized kamikaze drone captured by Ukraine, and it turns out that we've got Intel chips on the inside, made in the United States, which is not that surprising for people who know about supply chain stuff. Like these are components that can be sourced relatively cheaply from just about anywhere. Set as desktop background image. I don't think that's necessary. But yeah, so I want to open the image in a new tab and zoom in. So lots of, not that high res, but lots of interesting information here for electronics nerds about how one of these suicide drones might work. Obviously some of the stuff is capped and some of it has metal shields over it. But if you've been wondering what one of these looks like, which I definitely have, then looking and seeing what actually is powering these things is pretty interesting, because this is not a lot of money's worth of electronics, really. It's decent design, but you might also notice there's a lot of stuff that's just unpopulated, which is interesting to note as a electronics person.
Yeah, I wonder. So something that's been going on a lot during the pandemic and with supply chain issues with these PCBs is they will design it such that they can use multiple different components to achieve the same effect. So then they can just buy whichever one's in stock and then place that on the PCB, and they'll have a little more flexibility. And I imagine that's what Iran's doing as well, because a lot of these countries with sanctions in place against them, they'll set up companies in other countries, say Switzerland or somewhere like that, and then they'll operate them as a shell company and buy these components, because these components are widely used in a number of devices. So buying them isn't abnormal. So setting up another shell company, buying them, and then shipping them to Iran is not that difficult. And in fact, we've seen this with Russia doing this as well to avoid sanctions.
All right, so that's the brain of the drone.
Fascinating. Okay, talking about supply chain. Sorry, I have to run the stream here. So we have here an attack, supply chain attack on PHP. So I don't pretend to be super fluent with PHP and all of that, but so a company, Sonar, developed or discovered a 0-day in which it uses the packet manager composer, and apparently that package manager and the way it handles dependencies is done so if you have help file, then you can name that help file like any arbitrary.txt, and then there's another file which is like your table of contents and tells you where all the files for this module are. You're able to take advantage of that to do a code injection attack. And so you're able to inject code as the text title of the help.txt. And then when the help command is run for that module, it'll run that as a payload. Now, fortunately, this has been patched at this point, but it is really interesting to see these sorts of supply chain attacks where it was potentially millions of servers at risk because of how widely adopted PHP is and the Composer packet manager along with it. And then the next thing I have here is something I believe you wanted to touch on as well, is the Optus hack. So they're a telecommunication company that got breached a while back. Now, it's pretty wild, the scale here we're talking. So it was 9.8 million customers had data exposed. Now, luckily for 7.7 million of those customers, their government ID was like out of date. So they still got valid credentials for them, but it was out of date credentials. But still, for the 9.8 million customers in total, they got personal information, including email addresses, date of birth, and phone numbers. And what's really interesting here too is, so Optus sent out SMS texts to these customers who had data breached. But I was reflecting on the fact that, just a couple of weeks ago, we covered how there's these SMS scams, right? And I wonder how many people would have seen this and thought it was a scam and not because, you know, a common technique for scammers is to be like, oh, you need to go reset your password. Your password's been breached, and then give you a link, and then it just phishes your password. So it is an interesting intersectionality there of not getting phished, but then also like, you know, when your data is leaked, do the right thing. But what gets wilder here is, as part of that story, to prove that they had the data, they had leaked, I think, about 1,000 user credentials on a hacker forum. Now, some Australian teenager thought it would be a wise idea to take that data and try to ransom it to the people whose data it was. And so he emailed, I think it was, 93 individuals about their data and tried to get this ransom, but he used his personal bank account. So then the second someone reported it, the Australian version of the FBI was able to trace it back to him and arrested him. And now he's facing 10 years of imprisonment. So yeah, hacking is bad. Don't hack. Did you have anything else to add on that story?
No, you covered every part of it. All right, so over on my screen, we have a classic story of how you should make sure to change someone's credentials when they leave the company. So often if somebody has been keeping things running, they have a sense that things would just fall apart if they were ever fired. So you as an employer should really make sure that that doesn't happen intentionally in this case, because what happened here was this guy was laid off and he wanted to make it so that his employers would need him to come back so badly that they would offer him a better salary. So in order to facilitate this negotiation, he decided to do some very malicious things, like redirect the email to a totally unrelated domain to just take down all the email correspondence that was happening for this company, and also to lock the administrators out so that they basically couldn't do anything until they reached back to him and engaged with him. Where he went wrong was basically making this so obviously an attack that the company reached out to the FBI, who very quickly solved the mystery because he had logged in using, again, his old login credentials, which were still valid. So this was a pretty open and shut case because, again, he used his own credentials. That's not probably a very smart move. And also because his company had forgotten to rotate these out, making him the primary suspect as soon as all these problems were discovered. So in this case, he was sentenced to, well, looks like they're still figuring that out, but it's probably not going to be very good for him because it's 10 years of prison time and $250,000 of potential punishment he might get, but we still are waiting to find out how much.
Well, that's just so concerning to me too, that the company left those credentials in place for long afterwards. Like, you know, if he had done it like the day he was fired, like maybe that I could see, but leaving those credentials in place, I think it's just a reminder to every company that you need to have a plan in place for when employees are leaving the company, you know, whether they leave on what appears to be good terms or, you know, if you're firing them. Like, I think having a good plan in place to make sure that it's a clean break as far as their credentials is very important. And then also, I think that reinforces the notion too that you need to have something in place to start detecting, like, oh wait, why are all these things suddenly getting switched over, right? Like, if, you know, anyone in IT had just gotten one little pop-up notification like, hey, you just changed these 5 things right now, that seems a little abnormal, you might want to check that out. This whole thing could have been prevented.
Oh no, I got more.
Oh, okay, you got more.
Yeah, so in other cybercrime sentencing news, Netwalker Ransomware affiliate got 20 years in prison. And when this story involves a little bit of knowledge of the way that these sorts of attackers work together. Typically, people who are a bit more willing to take on risk and who might not be as technically skilled will be an affiliate of a ransomware group that creates a software that, you know, does the targeting and the attacks, and then leaves the actual risky part to affiliates who stand to make money without having to do any development work. The exchange is, if they get caught, they are often the ones that get burned because they're the ones using their own infrastructure to, you know, run these attacks and manage negotiation with the victims. So while they share some of the proceeds from the victims with the original hackers who developed the software, they do take on the risk because they are the ones actually using it to do the attacks against these companies. In this case, This guy got 240, that's 240 months in prison, which is a lot. He was also a Canadian who was extradited to the United States because he conducted a lot of attacks there. But this just goes to show that being a ransomware affiliate exposes you to a lot of risk. And if you're not doing the actual coding and you're not the person who's, actually developing the sort of software and you're just using it, then there's probably kind of a risk cost benefit assessment that the attackers have done that have been like, no, it's not worth it for us to do this one part. I would rather pay someone 20 to 40% of the ransom to just go do this one part that comes with 240 months in prison for me. Now, of course, these attackers who are developing the software tend to be a bit smarter, and they're the ones who want to mitigate their risk as much as possible. So it's much more rare that they're the ones that get caught. It's much more likely that the ransomware affiliates get caught because they tend to be lower skilled and tend to fulfill a more risky part of the supply chain here. So
I don't think these people have very good critical thinking skills because, like you were alluding to, right? It's the aspect of, wait a second, if this is such a lucrative and prosperous enterprise, why am I deploying the ransomware for them, right?
Because you can't write it, Yeah. And then another double exploitation ransomware attack that is currently in progress, LAUSD has now got their data back, but not the way that they wanted. So unfortunately, this is a double exploitation attacker who not only encrypted their data locally, but then also stole it and has been threatening to leak it for a long time unless they're compensated. Now, this data is incredibly sensitive. Going through some of the things that have been mentioned, there were confidential psychological assessments of students potentially included in this data that's been leaked. So that's a lot of extremely personal, very damning information that the school district is now going to have to defend all of. And also, they're not going to be able to be sure if all this data hasn't been tampered with. So all sorts of things could have been added to the data. It's very difficult for them to know now because they may or may not have access to their own local copy of this data anymore. So if they don't have access to their own data, there's really no way to be sure that the data that's being leaked is completely the way that it was when it was copied. And that's one of the problems with these sorts of attacks. The attackers can make the outcome worse for some of these ransomware victims by adding salacious things to the data and then releasing it. So it's really difficult to know what's legitimate and what's not here when these sorts of attackers get involved. But this is an ongoing and unfortunately very active attack against LAUSD, but it looks like they've run out of time now, at least for the extortion part. Whether or not they have access to their data, I actually don't remember. So I'll have to double check.
And this is where it hits home with like, making sure you have backups in place so that you can restore these critical systems, and then also practicing those backups, not just like having a plan, but then never actually utilizing it. And then also, the notion that I think certain companies think, oh, I'm too small, or like I'm a nonprofit, like no one would ever hit me with ransomware. Like, this is a school district.
I'm just the largest school district in the United States. Whoever would care about me?
Yeah, I think that it's dangerous to get those notions in your head, and you've got to make sure that no matter your size or what good you do for the world, some hacker can come along and try to steal your data and ransom it to you.
Right. So more importantly here, like the first thing that happened when Optus leaked their data was some teenager grabbed the data and started attempting to extort people immediately. It's highly likely that somebody is going to go through the data that's been leaked here and start their own campaign using data to either target families or other people who are impacted by this. So this is going to have very broad-reaching effects against everybody who's been impacted by this data breach.
Yeah, absolutely. So over here on my screen, I have a warning from the FBI.
So the FBI is always doing warnings.
I know, right? That's like, might as well be the tagline of this show is FBI warning. But yeah, so this time they're warning about pig butchering. And no, this isn't about pork. This is about cryptocurrency. No, they focus here on cryptocurrency scam, but I think this actually is a valid, or like this is a phishing technique that could be used for a variety of things, not just cryptocurrency. But essentially what pig butchering refers to is this notion of taking an individual and performing a targeted spear phishing attack, and then not only just going for the get rich kind of quick scheme of scamming where you're like, okay, send me $1 million or whatever, or I'm gonna leak something. this builds a relationship with that individual, pretending to be a friend or a long lost colleague or some other person that they might be familiar with, or just becoming an internet friend. And then over a period of months, building up that trusted relationship. And then in the critical time, they'll have them invest in a cryptocurrency marketplace. So this could, be buying Bitcoin. And then what they'll do is they'll use domain squatting or other techniques like that to make it look like a legitimate crypto exchange, have them start investing. And again, they don't immediately cash out and stop talking to the person. They have them continually invest over weeks, and then they purport to show them incredible gains, so that way they really get invested in this and oh, hey, I'm going to throw a lot of money at this. And in fact, one gentleman, a 50-year-old gentleman from San Francisco, lost $1 million like that. Now, that's a lot of money for an individual to lose.
It must be nice to have $1 million.
Yeah, I know, right? But yeah, and then that's what I was saying is, the FBI here is warning in particular about this for cryptocurrency. But I think this could be a big concern too for other sorts of phishing, because in previous episodes we've talked about other phishing scams where they'll appear as a recruiter and then go through a whole interview process and then send malicious phishing documents as a job offer to the target. So it's really concerning. A lot of these phishing scams are becoming incredibly complicated and hard to detect. And so some of the mitigation here that you might recommend is, be a little suspicious if that long lost cousin or stranger hits you up on social media. I definitely recommend using another method of communicating. If you have your old coworker's phone number, try calling them real quick and be like, hey, did you just message me on Facebook? That sort of thing. And then also, with typo squatting, always make sure the URL you're going to is right and it's not misspelt slightly.
So one of our viewers is asking, what's the proper way to report an ongoing attack campaign or a malicious program you find?
Mm-hmm.
If you're not super confident with looking into it yourself, when I found an active campaign, I just literally sent it to a reporter at Bleeping Computer, and they sent it to one of their contacts that analyzes that sort of thing, and then they ran a story on it. So if there's reporters that cover that sort of thing, and you have a pretty good little succinct story of what's going on, what all the links are, screenshots, whatever, then provided it pans out, then often they'll cover it, and then you can get some awareness to what happened. Anyway, that worked for me when I was reporting on an ongoing campaign I discovered a couple of weeks ago. So that would be my advice. And no, the Raspberry Pi shortage is not caused by Iranian suicide drones, although that's a great question.
Or Cody buying all of them.
I already had them by the time the shortage happened, so I don't know anything about that. So I have some good news for people who have been struck by some very specific strains of ransomware. Apparently, these are the MafiaWare 666 ransomware strains, which include such well-known things as JCrypt and RIP LMAO, which would be just embarrassing to be hit by. They include loading screens like this, and they have a encryption flaw, which makes it so you can just recover the files because it's not actually encrypted to the point that you need to pay anyone to get access. So typically they're asking for between $50 and $300. It's not that much, but sometimes the ransom have reached up to the tens of thousands of dollars. It really depends on who's operating this ransomware. Again, it sucks though. So fortunately, if you want to unrecrypt your files, you can go ahead, aka decrypt. You can use the MafiaWare 666 decryptor to be able to get all of your files back. So very great. This happens every so often when attackers are using just poor methods of encryption. Sometimes we see the opposite, where they mess it up so badly that it's impossible to actually recover the data. So in this case, it's just very fortunate that they got it just right enough to encrypt the data and just wrong enough to be able to brute force the key and get your files back. So good news for anybody who has files encrypted by that, although it looks like this group might not have been active for a while.
Okay, so on my screen, I have a story about the Russian mobilization. So as y'all might be aware, Russia recently did its first mobilization since World War II. And predictably, this has caused a bit of chaos in Russia, as not everyone likes a draft and not everyone wants to go fight in Ukraine. So there are a large segment of the population who is attempting to get out of this draft. Now, there are two primary ways they're trying to get out. That is, those that want to stay in Russia are trying to get documents which say, hey, I'm not medically fit for duty. And then there's another segment who are trying to flee the country. Now, as you can imagine, such a desperate situation has created quite the opportunity for scammers. And so the first thing that's happening is there have been a large number of scammers who've created fake websites on the dark web in particular, trying to sell these medical exemption forms, and then even promising to go in and change the database so that recruiters wouldn't even come looking for these individuals. Now, they charge a very suspiciously low price of $470, and then they take the money and run.
Mm-hmm.
And what's very interesting about these scams too is because they're preying on people that are desperate, they're going to take risks that they might not normally. And then on top of that, when they take the money and run, the target can't do anything about it, because what are you going to do? Go to the police and say, hey, I was trying to illegally get out of this draft. Can you go find these hackers, right? So they get in this crunch where they don't feel able to report these crimes. And so it really creates this awful situation where desperate people are getting taken advantage of. Now, the other group of people, those trying to flee the country, have increasingly been turning to burner phones, essentially, because one method that the Russian government has of tracking individuals, the military age, is tracking their phone, because, they can give themselves a warrant for that. So gray SIM cards are SIM cards, say, that a third party will buy and then sell on places like eBay or other online marketplaces. And oftentimes, these SIM cards do not require any sort of identification. So it's those cheap mobile phones. You plug in the SIM card and it's got 60 minutes or 120 minutes or, some number of minutes on it that you can use. So these have increasingly become popular. But, as in the game of cat and mouse, the Russians got onto this, and now they're starting to use the IMEI, which is like a unique identification number that is ingrained in each cellular modem to track individual phones, even if they're not already associated with a person. And this has been used for a long time in things such as rogue cell towers, femtocells. They go by many names. But every time your phone communicates, it uses this unique identification number so the cell tower knows who it's talking to and can return requests. But now the border guards are linking the IMEI number of phones with people as they leave the country so that they can track them even if they have a gray SIM card. And this isn't the first time countries have done this sort of thing. Journalists visiting Iran, for instance, have the similar thing done. Or going into other countries, you'll have your phone search. So it is an important reminder, for people going to some of these countries to use a burner phone, but a burner phone isn't always perfect.
One interesting thing to note with this story also is that this technology is a standard,
Mhm.
but it is not a universal standard. So there are some phones out there that allow you to change the IMEI because they store it in a region of memory which is rewritable, and that is in complete violation of the standard. However, nobody's put them in handcuffs yet, so you can get a phone that allows you to rewrite this portion of the memory, which is super interesting. But it is like mostly Chinese manufacturers, and again, it is in violation of the way the standard was laid out for it. But that's why standards, they're just a suggestion.
Yeah.
All right, so over on my screen, we also have an interesting story about a supply chain attack that was against a very popular communication, chat service that's designed for customers who are visiting a website. So if you've ever gone to a website and a little chat opens up and it allows you to talk to a customer service person or a bot, this was actually Trojanized. So this Trojanized version was available from September 26th all the way to September 29th. And it allowed a threat actor to launch a backdoor and do a lot of very sketchy things. And there were some post-exploitation things observed as well that linked this kind of back to a Chinese threat actor because of a couple reasons. Use of chat software to develop malware, which has also been in a campaign against some gambling websites in Asia. Use of Microsoft metadata merge utility to load binaries. Domain naming conventions for command and control servers, and C2 domains hosted on Alibaba infrastructure. And then also some of the code for the final payload contains comments in Chinese. So there was definitely some indications here that it was a Chinese threat actor that had previously been targeting these gambling sites, but now had moved on to targeting, again, a very popular software as a service vendor. And in this case, there was really not much of an indication afterwards as to what happened here. Like, the company has fixed the problem, but they never said exactly how this backdoor was inserted into their product. So that's concerning. Like, maybe they should tell people what happened. But yeah, so anybody who is using the service should absolutely make sure that they didn't download a version between these dates and update to the most recent version immediately, because it does contain a backdoor that has been seen being actively exploited.
Yeah. So to answer a quick question about that, yes, you, I believe, could in theory jam a cellular device, and then you wouldn't be able to be tracked by the IMEI number. But if you did that, you'd be breaking another law and also doing something that's much louder and more easily tracked.
Wait, I'm sorry, you're doing what? Because like anytime your phone connects to the cell tower with your IMEI,
Right.
you're busted.
Yeah,
so you
exactly.
should take a rock to that phone, and it would do a better job than like having
Or
an
microwave
illegal
it.
jammer that will like allow people to track you, because it's just blasting out very recognizable noises. I would say, like, yeah, take a rock to it or put it in a chip bag or something. You know, like basically kill the signal. And get a new phone, because it's permanently put into the part of the memory that's not able to be rewritten unless it's like a Xiaomi phone or whatever.
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing too where you hear about people getting caught like years later because they suddenly reactivated the phone because they were too cheap to dispose of it originally. And speaking of Android phones and hacking, we have another Android malware, RatMilad. I'm not good with saying these names, but basically what's interesting here is this is distributed by a fake app which disguises itself as one of those like burner phones app. So, you know, if you ever looked into burner phones, you would discover that there is another option, which is basically a virtual burner, which is usually an app of some sort that will give you another number that you can use. So this appears to be one of those sorts of apps. However, when the user downloads it, they get asked for a lot of permissions, and that should always ring a lot of alarm bells, because when an app asks for a lot of permissions like that, they're often doing it so they can do things like sideloading another APK, and that's what this one does. So I believe even if you downloaded this app, used it once or twice, didn't like it, then removed it, the malicious APK or the malicious app would still be on the device, and it's designed to run silently in the background. And what's also disturbing about this too is, again, as I was talking about earlier, is these very complicated, not necessarily in this case phishing, but scams where, you know, in this case, they set up a website. So that way, you know, if you Googled this and looked it up, it looked like a legitimate website, looked like a legitimate app, you know, running some advertisement around it and various promotion schemes is how this was distributed. And it doesn't appear to have been targeted at all. It was just spray and pray whoever happened to download this app. However, you do get some inherent targeting when doing this sort of thing, because only certain types of individuals will be looking for a virtual burner phone to begin with. So they did target it in that regard. But yeah, very concerning, because, you know, rats like this can see your text, your MAC address, so that way it can be used to track your device in other ways. Of course, it could always track you via GPS location data and other important information.
All right, so in another story of cyber criminals getting caught, Germany's Bundesamt, let's call them the BKA, their federal criminal service carried out raids that netted a $4 million operation of cyber criminals who were basically doing banking scams. They were quite sophisticated. So from the information here, it seems as though these were actually people that were in they were like cybercrime affiliates, or they were buying tools off of the darknet, and they were not the actual authors of these tools. However, they were very adept at using them. So while some software developer on the darknet has been making a bunch of money off these guys, they're the ones that got caught. So it looks like it was a 24 and 40-year-old two German citizens who were targeting a specific bank, and their forgery was incredibly sophisticated. It was really, really difficult to tell the difference between a real website and a fake website. And in this case, they were also able to get a TAN, or transaction authentication number, which allowed them to make transactions on the victim's accounts, which is probably where the 4 million euro came in. So eventually they were caught because, the German equivalent of the FBI got called in because $4 million went missing from people's accounts. And again, it does seem like they made extensive use of resorting to offers from other cyber criminals who worked on the dark net. So to me, that's kind of code for like they were either like an affiliate or they were buying tools off the dark net, and they were just the ones taking on the risk. In this case, they have been arrested, and I guess we'll stand by to see how much they're sentenced for. But that is 4 million euros is a lot of euros to steal. So they're probably going to get in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, it's practically all the euros.
It is not.
Okay, so on my screen here, I have yet another FBI warning. This time,
our second of the stream.
Yeah. This time they're warning about cyber attacks targeting election systems. Obviously, that's a concern on some people's mind with the upcoming midterm election. Essentially, the short and sweet here is they're like, there's no evidence that there's ever been an attack on like voting machines or ballots or anything, and those breaches that have been found have all been remediated almost instantly. I do find some of the statements like a little concerning, because when people often make statements like, oh, this is unhackable and it would never be hacked, that's when they get hit by a breach. But it's generally here, they're just trying to reassure the population about the integrity of the upcoming election. So very interesting. And of course, they have some recommendations here on how to keep things secure, like using local government portals. But that's a concerning thing. Like with often these government websites, they're maybe underfunded and older looking and easily, spoofed, for instance. So I think, again, be careful on which URLs you're going to and make sure you're actually going to a .gov website, for instance.
All right, so for our probably final story of the day, if you go over to my screen, do you see a virus? The answer actually is yes. This is a virus.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it turns out steganography has been a tool that allows a lot of evasion of like network filters and all this other stuff that's supposed to catch like malicious commands or malicious scripts by hiding it in something that's difficult to scan, like an image or something that looks valid but also has something embedded in it. In this case, attackers, a group by the name of Wisheti, that's believed to be a Chinese state-based actor, was actually using the Windows logo as a convenient way of downloading malicious instructions.
Wow.
So after initially infecting a computer with a backdoor, they would use an XOR encrypted backdoor in an old Windows logo bitmap image. And this was hosted on like a secured and trusted server. So it was very, very unlikely that this download would trigger any sort of network flags. Once it's on the system, it would be extracted and then used to trigger a number of CVEs to try to gain persistence, perform file and directory actions, start, enumerate, kill processes, modify the Windows registry, download additional payloads, which obviously sucks, and exfiltrate files, which is pretty much all you need to do if you want to do some very bad things on a computer or steal files. So this also seems like everything you would need to do to make ransomware. So that's obviously a big issue with any of the payloads that might come down the pipeline, because you've basically laid all the groundworks for a double exploitation like ransomware attack at this point. So kind of scary to know that even the download of this innocent looking Windows logo could in fact be a malicious script. Although, the quality does look a little bumpy.
Yeah, it looks a little weird.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's the sort of thing you would notice, especially if you're running like an older Windows system.
Yeah, so this is actually the Windows logo hiding the payload according to the caption. And typically in steganography, you'll see like little artifacts and other pieces of data be added. And it looks like just a little bit strange, like around here and some of the other areas. But like having done steganography before, like it warps the data in a way that causes these weird artifacts and then also these bumps that you see. So interesting to see. Of course, like you can't just examine every image, and be like, there's hidden data in there just because it's low quality. But some of these low quality artifacts specifically come about in some of the common ways that people do steganography. So
Mhm.
an interesting attack, bypassing a lot of firewall stuff by having a simple Windows image being
Mhm.
hosted on a trusted server.
Very spooky.
Not that complicated, and seemingly pretty effective. All right, so that's all the news we have time for today. If you have a question, please make sure to leave it on our YouTube channel, and we will answer it live on our Wednesday Q&A
Mhm.
next week with either Michael, our cryptozoology expert, or Alex, our prototyping and hacking expert. So thank you to everybody who stayed with us on the stream. Sorry for starting late this time. And a big shout out to Veronis for letting us do this stream every week. If you like it, make sure to comment on the LinkedIn, the YouTube. Let them know that you like the stream, and we will keep doing it. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye.